Hello, today we're going over section 3.3, which is solving quadratic functions by factoring. So a reminder from yesterday or last class, quadratic equations are any equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a cannot equal 0. So last section we dealt with product sum factoring. Today we'll go over dealing with fractions if you have some product sum factoring, as well as some other factoring methods. So if you come across a quadratic function that has fractions, the easiest thing is to factor out those fractions first. So for example, factor 1/4 x squared minus x minus 3. First thing I would do is factor out 1/4. Now, when we're factoring out something in front, that's the same as dividing everything by it. So if we're dividing everything by 1/4, that's the same as multiplying everything by 4. So this becomes x squared minus 4x minus 12. Now from here, I'll do the product sum factoring. So we have a product of -12 with a sum of -4. So we have two things that multiply to -12, add to -4. So that would be -6 and +2, because those two multiply to give us -12 and they add to give us -4. So you'll also note that when I factored this, I kept the 1/4 in front. We need to make sure we keep it, not get rid of it, because theoretically, if we have factored something correctly, we should be able to multiply everything back together to go back to our original function. Or if we get rid of the 1/4, that's not going to be possible. Okay, another thing that we'll talk about today is perfect square trinomials. If the first and last value of a quadratic are perfect squares, odds are that it's probably a perfect square trinomial. To determine if it's a perfect square trinomial, take the square root of our first and last terms. Once you do that, take those values, multiply them together, and multiply by 2. If it equals our middle term, it's a perfect square trinomial. And to factor, we're just going to take those values that we already calculated by taking the square roots and use those for our binomial. So for example, factor 4x squared plus 12xy plus 9y squared. So like I said, this one we can see as a perfect square, this one as well. So we'll take the square roots of them. So square root of 4x squared is 2x. Square root of 9y squared is 3y. So we'll take those, we'll multiply them by each other and by 2. And if they give us a 12xy, we know this is a perfect squared trinomial. So we've got 2 times 3 is 6, times 2 is 12, x times y gives us xy. So this is a perfect squared trinomial, which for factoring it, we're just going to use the values we calculate over here. So we've got 2x plus 3y. And then it's just going to be squared because it's a perfect squared trinomial. So our factors are identical. Now, in some cases, this term here will be a negative term. That will occur if this middle value is negative. Okay, next we'll talk about factoring without a C term. If we have no C term, we factor by taking out an x term and possibly a coefficient. So we have a couple examples of that. So we've got 0 equals 5x squared plus 4x, as well as 0 equals 2x squared plus 4x. So with this first one, we look to see what's in common between these two. Looks like the only thing in common is the x, so we'll factor that out. So we've got 0 is equal to x. If we divide this by x, we get 5x. If we divide this by x, we get 4. Now, if we look at this to figure out what our solutions are, if this x in front is 0, 0 times anything is 0, so we know one of our solutions is 0. However, on we can always take to the side, so 5x plus 4, make it equal 0, rearrange and solve for x. And we get 0 and -4/5. This next one, when we look at it, we can see we can factor an x out, but we can also factor 2 out. So we'll factor both of those out. So we have 0 is equal to 2x times this divided by 2x is x. This divided by 2x is 2. So from this, we can see x is going to equal 0, because if 2 times 0 is 0, that makes this whole thing 0. And then this would be -2. So you'll notice if you have no c value, one of your answers will always be 0. If our equation has a square root in it, what we want to do is isolate the square root onto one side of our equation. So we get our square root on one side, move everything else to the other side. We then square both sides, and then from that point, we see what we have and determine which of our other factoring methods we can use. So for example, solve. We have the square root of x plus 4 plus 8 equals x. So first thing I would do is move the 8 to the other side because we want the square root on its own. So we have the square root of x plus 4 equals x minus 8. At this point, to get rid of the square root, we're going to square both sides. So our square root and our square will cancel out. So that gives us x plus 4 equals x minus 8 times x minus 8. We'll now want to FOIL this out. So we have x plus 4 equals x times x is x squared. X times -8 is -8x. -8 times x is -8x. -8 times -8 is 64. At this point, we'll want to move everything to one side. So subtract x from both sides. Also subtract 4 from both sides. So that gives me 0 is equal to x squared minus 17x plus 60. So now we have a trinomial. So I will use product sum factoring. So we have a product of 60 with a sum of -17. So two things that multiply to 60 and add to -17 would be -12 and -5. They multiply together to give us -60, and they add together to give us -17. So we have 0 is equal to x minus 12 times x minus 5. Looking at this, we then determine that x is equal to 12 and 5. Now, practice for this section starts on page 209.